She only wanted a quiet place to pray. She only wanted peace. But when Sister Eliana slipped through the heavy wooden door that night, she didn't know the cameras were rolling. She didn't know that the old chapel basement had been sealed, for a reason. And what the security footage captured was a ritual no one had spoken of for over 100 years. A ritual that should have stayed buried forever. The bells had long since tolled for Compline, and the convent had settled into its nightly rhythm of silence and sleep. The heavy stone corridors, usually bustling with the soft footfalls of sisters going about their daily duties, now lay empty, and still, stretching like endless arteries into the deeper, older parts of the monastery. Shadows gathered thickly in the corners, pooling beneath the faded tapestries and the worn wooden beams that held the ancient structure upright. The faint scent of incense still lingered in the air, mixing with the sharper notes of cold stone and aged wood. Sister Eliana stood alone at the edge of the chapel entrance, her small form dwarfed by the towering arched doorway behind her. She was not meant to be wandering. She knew that. After night prayers, each sister was expected to retreat to her cell, to reflect, to rest, to prepare the soul for another day of devotion. But something gnawed at Eliana from within, a restlessness, a hunger she could not name. Her prayers had felt hollow lately, their words tumbling from her lips without meaning, bouncing off stone walls and returning to her emptier than before. Tonight, she could not bear the suffocating smallness of her room, the mechanical repetition of rituals that no longer stirred her spirit. She needed something more, even if she did not yet know what. Her feet moved of their own accord, guiding her through the dim corridors. The flickering wall sconces cast long, distorted shadows that moved like silent sentinels alongside her. She passed closed doors, each marked with a simple cross, each guarding the sleeping forms of her sisters. She did not linger. Her steps were soft but certain, guided by an invisible pull toward the oldest part of the convent, the section the others rarely spoke of, the halls where dust hung thick and the air grew colder, as if the building itself exhaled differently. There. It was at the end of one of these forgotten corridors that she found the door, narrow, unmarked, almost hidden in the heavy stone wall. It was ajar, just enough to catch the edge of the light from a dying sconce, a thin line of darkness, spilled out, pooling on the floor at her feet. Eliana paused, her hand hovering over the rough iron handle. She could hear nothing beyond the door. No creaking floorboards, no whispered prayers, no signs of life at all. Yet something urged her forward. The handle was cold against her skin, colder than it should have been. As she pushed the door open, a faint groan escaped from the ancient hinges, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the dense air within. A narrow stone staircase descended beyond the threshold, spiraling down into darkness. The scent that rose to meet her was older than dust, a heavy, earthy smell tinged with something metallic, something almost sweet in its wrongness. It wrapped itself around her senses, prickling at the back of her throat. She hesitated only a moment before stepping inside, the door swinging closed behind her with a soft but final click. The corridor above faded away, and only the thin thread of light from the open stairwell guided her descent. The steps were uneven, worn by countless feet over generations she could not imagine. Her hand trailed along the wall, feeling the dampness that clung to the stones, the faint indentations where others had pressed for balance, for courage. The farther down she went, the more the convent above felt like a distant memory. The silence deepened, pressing against her eardrums, muting even the sound of her own breath. It was not the peace she had sought, not the soft, reassuring silence of a sanctuary, but a denser, heavier void that seemed to swallow sound and thought alike. She reached the bottom of the stairs, her final step landing on cold, rough-hewn stone. Before her stretched a small antechamber cloaked in gloom. A single, broken lantern hung from a rusted chain overhead, swinging slightly in a breeze Eliana could not feel. Against one wall stood a simple wooden door, Much older than the ones above, its surface scarred by deep gouges and blackened at the edges. She moved toward it, her footsteps silent on the stone floor, her breath held tight in her chest. The door was not locked. It swung open under the slightest pressure, revealing a low-ceilinged room beyond. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting slowly to the dimness. The space was sparse. A stone altar draped in a cloth so faded it was almost colorless, a few iron sconces fixed to the walls, their candles long since burned down to puddles of wax. And along the floor, faint but unmistakable, strange symbols had been carved into the stone, circling the altar like a forgotten prayer written in a language no one spoke anymore. Eliana stood at the threshold, the weight of the air pressing down on her shoulders, the chill seeping into her bones. She should have turned back. She should have fled up the stairs, back to the safe, narrow walls of her cell. But she remained, where she was, caught in a moment of suspended breath, feeling the invisible threads that had drawn her here tighten around her like a net. There was a presence in the room, not seen but felt, not welcoming but waiting. Her fingers tightened around the rosary tucked into her pocket. The small comfort of its smooth beads gave her the strength to move forward, one slow step at a time. She crossed the threshold fully, the old door swinging closed behind her with a hollow thud. The sound echoed in the small space, fading into a silence so complete it felt almost alive. Sister Eliana did not know that above her, buried among the tangle of wires and crumbling stone, an old security camera blinked to life, its lens turning with a mechanical whir. Forgotten by the living, ignored by the sisters, it captured every grainy frame of her descent, every hesitant movement, every moment of trespass. The camera's silent gaze watched as she knelt before the altar, her head bowed, her shadow stretching, long across the marked floor. In the frozen moment between faith and fear, Sister Eliana whispered her first prayer of the night, not knowing that the room had heard her, not knowing that the room had been listening for far longer than she had been alive. The room seemed to breathe with a life of its own, though no air stirred within its walls. As Sister Eliana's eyes adjusted to the muted gloom, she began to notice details she had missed in those first uneasy moments. The stone walls, rough and uneven, bore the marks of centuries of neglect. Hairline cracks spidered out from corners, and patches of dampness bloomed like bruises along the cold surfaces. Yet, despite the age, the room was not abandoned. Something about it felt maintained, preserved not with care, but with necessity, as though it had been sealed not to honor it, but to contain whatever it had once been built to house. The small, wooden altar at the far end of the room drew her forward like a lodestar. It was simple in construction, but heavy with presence. The cloth that draped over it, though faded to a ghostly pallor, remained intact, its threads coarse and scratchy, beneath the layers of dust. She noticed, almost absently, that no icons or crucifixes adorned the space, no images of saints, no sign of devotion to Christ or the Virgin. This absence gnawed at her, more unsettling than any overt sign of corruption could have been. A prayer. Room without prayers. Candles ringed the altar, some fallen over, others half melted into shapeless puddles of ancient wax. The iron sconces along the walls held the blackened remains of candles long extinguished. The room smelled faintly of cold stone, old smoke, and something deeper, an underlying scent like earth turned over after rain, sharp and metallic. It curled in her nostrils, setting her teeth on edge. Her gaze dropped to the floor. It was there. She saw them fully for the first time. The carvings, intricate, deliberate, etched deeply into the stone beneath the thin layer of dust. They formed interlocking circles, looping symbols that danced along the floor in patterns she could not immediately comprehend. Some resembled letters from ancient alphabets she had seen only in dusty theological texts, while others twisted into shapes utterly alien to her mind. They converged beneath the altar, forming a dense knot of lines and symbols that pulsed faintly in the flickering candlelight. She knelt carefully, her knees pressing into the cold stone, and brushed aside a swath of dust with the hem of her sleeve. Beneath the grime, the carvings gleamed faintly as if the stone had been recently cut or polished. Her fingers traced the lines almost unconsciously, feeling the shallow grooves, the strange vibrations that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. There was an energy here, not imagined but real, thrumming at the edge of perception like the low resonance of a bell after it had been struck. The longer she stayed, the more the room seemed to close in around her. The ceiling, low and uneven, pressed down heavily, and the narrowness of the space amplified every tiny sound. The scratch of her sleeve against stone, the soft breath she barely dared to take. Even the distant sounds of the convent above, the wind rattling against ancient shutters, the faint drip of condensation down the walls, seemed swallowed by the room's dense, unnatural quiet. Her eyes were drawn again to the altar. Something about its presence felt wrong. It was not merely a forgotten relic of faith, but something older, something made for a purpose far removed from worship. The cloth covering it shifted slightly, in a breeze that did not exist. Sister Eliana's heart skipped a beat. She stayed kneeling for a long moment, waiting, listening, but no other movement followed. Still, a chill prickled along her spine. In the dimness, she noticed additional details. Tiny black marks along the base of the altar, like soot stains or dried remnants of something burned long ago. Small metal rings were embedded at intervals, around the perimeter of the room, set low into the stone, as if they had once anchored something. Ropes, perhaps, or chains. The realization struck her cold. This was not a place built for prayer and peace. It was a place built to hold something. Down. A part of her screamed to leave, to flee back up the stairs, to forget this place had ever whispered to her restless heart. But another part, the deeper, darker part, urged her to stay, to understand, to uncover. Curiosity gnawed at her more fiercely than fear, and it was that fatal curiosity that drove her to rise slowly from her knees and move toward the altar. The air thickened with each step, becoming viscous, almost tangible as if she were walking through water. Her hand hovered over the cloth, trembling. She hesitated, her instincts warring against the pull of the unknown. Then, almost involuntarily, she grasped the edge of the fabric and lifted it. Beneath the cloth lay not the smooth stone she expected, but a carved depression, shallow and circular, filled with old ash and something darker. Symbols etched in two. The base of the altar spiraled inward toward a central point where a small iron plate sat embedded into the stone. It was blackened, corroded by time, but the outlines of more ancient markings were visible beneath the grime. Eliana recoiled slightly, but did not let go of the cloth. The ritual nature of the place was now undeniable. This had been an altar, yes, but not to any god she had ever prayed to. This had been a site of offerings, of invocations, of bindings. She dropped the cloth back over the altar as if covering. It could undo the knowledge now seared into her mind. The flame of the single candle she had lit earlier guttered violently, nearly extinguishing itself. She turned toward the door, heart pounding, but found herself rooted in place. The symbols on the floor seemed to shimmer at the edges of her vision, twisting in subtle, nauseating ways that made her doubt the solidity of the world around her. The room was no longer merely strange. It was alive, watching, waiting. Somewhere, hidden high among the cracked stones and ancient beams, the security camera's lens continued its unblinking watch, recording every tremor in the candlelight, every stolen breath, every faltering step. A silent witness to the moment Sister Eliana crossed a threshold from which there could be no easy return. And though she could not see it yet, though she would not understand until it was far too late, the room had already begun its slow, inexorable work upon her soul. Sister Eliana stood frozen before the altar, the heavy silence pressing against her chest like an invisible hand. The faint illumination from the single candle barely reached the far edges of the room now, the corners sinking into an oppressive, formless dark. She could hear her own heartbeat drumming in her ears, loud and frantic, each beat a desperate cry against the terrible stillness surrounding her. Yet, beneath that fear pulsed something even stronger, a gnawing pull, a whisper at the edge of hearing, urging her forward. She drew a shaky breath and stepped back from the altar, her eyes scanning the floor, the walls, the ceiling, seeking anything, any sign that might explain the invisible tension straining the room. Her gaze fell again to the carvings etched into the stone floor. In the shifting light, they seemed to undulate slightly, as if breathing or responding to her presence. She rubbed her eyes, willing away the illusion. But when she looked again, the patterns still pulsed softly with a life all their own. The cloth over the altar shifted once more, a slow, almost deliberate ripple, though there was no wind. This time. She did not hesitate. Her fingers moved to lift it again, drawn by a compulsion she could neither name nor resist. The air grew colder as she pulled the fabric aside, revealing the shallow depression beneath it in full. The ashes and dark residue within it now seemed to glow faintly with a light not of this world, a soft, pulsing illumination that did not banish the shadows, but deepened them. As she knelt closer, Eliana saw that the iron plate embedded in the center was not fixed as she had first assumed. It was loose, rocking slightly when she brushed it with her fingertips. Her mind screamed warnings she did not want to hear, but her body moved as if in a trance. Slowly, carefully, she slipped her nails beneath the edge of the plate and lifted. The metal came free with a groan that reverberated through the stones like a low moan. Beneath it lay a hollow space, barely large enough for a hand to reach into. From the cavity, the scent of ancient earth rose, damp and metallic, carrying with it the heavy promise of something long buried and better forgotten. Something gleamed at the bottom, an object wrapped in tattered, almost unrecognizable fabric. Without thinking, without allowing herself time to doubt, she reached into the darkness and pulled it free. It was a book, small, thick, its cover blackened by time and soot. Strange symbols adorned its surface, pressed deep into the leather, writhing slightly in the uncertain candlelight. Eliana cradled it in her hands, feeling a warmth radiate from it, pulsing with a slow, deliberate beat, as if the book itself were alive. She should have dropped it, should have run from the room, but instead she found herself sinking to the floor, the book resting heavily in her lap. Her fingers traced the edges of the binding, feeling every crack and groove. The book exuded a strange energy, a force that seemed to weave itself into her blood, whispering promises she could not fully hear but instinctively understood. It spoke to the ache inside her, the yearning for something beyond the rigid walls of duty and silence, the longing for meaning that had driven her to wander these forbidden corridors in the first place. The candle flickered again, the flame, bowing low as if in reverence or fear. Shadows gathered thicker around her, the air growing heavier, colder. Her breath condensed into small shivering clouds before her face. Still she sat, immobile, the book pulsing against her palms. A sudden vibration ran through the floor, subtle but unmistakable, a tremor like the stirring of some vast creature deep beneath the earth. The carvings around her responded, their lines shimmering, twisting, pulling her gaze back to the center of the room. The patterns seemed to reconfigure themselves as she watched, forming new shapes, shapes she could not comprehend but which filled her with a visceral dread, as if her soul recognized truths her mind was unequipped to bear. The heavy wooden door behind her creaked softly, though no hand touched it. The temperature in the room plunged, and a deep, bone-deep pressure settled onto her shoulders. Eliana opened the book. The pages within were thin, brittle, and darkened with age. Symbols filled every line, not written, but carved into the paper. itself etched so deeply that the letters seemed to bleed shadows. As she turned the pages, her fingertips tingled painfully, as though the book were drawing something from her, some essence she had carried unaware until now. On the third page, the symbols changed. They formed a pattern, a spiral centered around, a blank space, an emptiness that seemed to devour the surrounding text. Eliana stared into that void, and the room shifted. It was subtle at first. The stone walls breathed, expanding and contracting. The floor trembled beneath her knees. The faint light from the candle bent inward, swallowed by the growing darkness around her. From the altar, a low, rhythmic sound began. A heartbeat, slow and steady, resonating in the stones, the air, her chest. The carvings on the floor flared to life, casting a sickly, muted glow that bathed the entire room in a shifting, restless light. The air grew thick, laden with the scent of burning incense and something fouler, something that spoke of rot and long-dead things stirring once again. Sister Eliana clutched the book tightly to her chest, but the connection had already been made. The ancient rite, dormant for generations, was unfolding anew, and she was its unwilling catalyst. Far above, the forgotten security camera continued its silent vigil, its lens capturing every flicker of movement, every shifting shadow, every tremor of awakening. In the grainy feed that no one would see until it was too late, the old prayer room was no longer empty. It was alive with ancient purpose, reborn through the hands of a restless, searching soul who had opened what was meant to stay sealed forever, and somewhere deep beneath the convent something responded, something stirred. Far above Sister Eliana, hidden in the cracked stone of the convent's ceilings, the forgotten security camera flickered to life. Its old mechanical lens whirred softly, adjusting its focus as it captured the scene unfolding in the depths below. Grainy static flickered across the feed, but the image was clear enough. A single candle guttering against the darkness, a young nun kneeling at the center of strange, glowing symbols, and the ancient book resting open across her lap. The room seemed to shift and breathe around her. The carvings on the floor, faintly illuminated by the trembling candlelight, pulsed rhythmically, in time with the slow, heavy thudding of something unseen. The faint heartbeat in the walls grew louder with each passing second, as if the building itself had awoken from a deep, malevolent slumber. The once dead air moved now, brushing across Eliana's face with a chill that seemed to carry whispered fragments of words she could not fully understand. The book in her hands grew heavier, its pages vibrating faintly as if responding to an unseen call. She tried to close it, but her hands refused to obey. Instead, the pages fluttered forward of their own volition, stopping on a blank sheet at the center. Only it was not truly blank. As she watched, dark lines began to seep upward through the page, forming shapes and symbols too ancient for her to name. They shifted and twisted, writhing like living things, coalescing into a single, jagged mark. From the far side of the room, near the hidden alcove in the stone, the ancient relics began to stir. The tarnished chalices rattled softly against the stone slab, and the blackened candles, untouched for decades, flickered back to life, each one igniting with a small, unnatural flame that burned not gold, but deep, blood red. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Frost began to creep along the stone floor in delicate, spidery patterns, racing toward the center where Eliana knelt. The breath that escaped her lips misted heavily, curling and twisting in the eerie light. Somewhere deep below the convent, a grinding, groaning sound rumbled upward, shaking dust from the walls. It was a noise of movement, of ancient things shifting, after centuries of stillness. The symbols beneath Eliana brightened, casting an unnatural glow against the walls, and the heartbeat grew louder still, filling her ears, drowning out all rational thought. Her body trembled uncontrollably, but still she could not move. The book, the symbols, the very room itself held her in place, locking her into the unfolding ritual she had unwittingly reignited. The candlelight bent and warped, throwing tall, monstrous shadows across the walls, and for a moment, the air shimmered as though something vast and unseen passed through it. Above, the security feed continued to record, catching the moment the shadows on the wall detached themselves and moved independently, forming vague, terrible shapes that stalked the perimeter of the chamber. Their movements were slow, deliberate, circling the kneeling figure at the center of the room. Then, without warning, a heavy, ancient force slammed downward from the unseen depths above. The book snapped shut with a deafening clap that echoed through the stones, extinguishing every candle at once and plunging the chamber into total darkness. In the final flicker of dying light, the security camera caught a glimpse of Eliana's face. Eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream, as the darkness swallowed her whole, and then the camera, overloaded by the sudden surge of unnatural energy, shorted out, the screen going black, leaving the world above blind once more to the nightmare that had been set free below. The convent woke uneasy the next morning. A strange coldness hung in the corridors, deeper than the usual dampness of stone. The sisters moved more slowly, casting cautious glances at the darkened chapel corners and shivering without reason. No one could say why, but an unspoken fear clung to them like a second skin. Some whispered of bad dreams, of voices that echoed faintly in their rooms, of the old bells swaying though no wind touched the air. Few noticed that Sister Eliana's bed remained undisturbed, her belongings untouched as if she had vanished between one breath and the next. Below, in the sealed basement, the ancient patterns carved into the floor pulsed faintly under the stone, hidden from sight but alive with new purpose. The faint heartbeat that Eliana had heard now radiated upward, a low vibration embedded in the walls, barely perceptible, but inescapable. Hairline cracks spread quietly across the structure's foundations, threading their way through the ancient rock like veins. With each hour that passed, the presence she had awakened grew stronger, sinking invisible roots into the convent's very bones. The Mother Superior noticed first. Walking through the main hallway toward morning prayers, she paused near the old wing, the one no one used anymore, the one even she had long since stopped thinking about. There, on the heavy wooden door that had once led to the basement stairwell, deep scratches had appeared overnight, gouges running in erratic patterns as though something had clawed from the inside. She reached out, intending to bless the door, but recoiled at the sharp metallic chill emanating from the wood, as if the heart of winter had taken up residence within it. Later that day, one of the novices cleaning the side chapel found a small pool of black liquid seeping through the floor cracks. It moved sluggishly like oil, but smelled of iron and ash. She scrubbed it away in silence, too afraid to report what she had seen, telling herself it was only some old water leak staining the stone. But in the hours that followed, the stain returned, and with it came whispers, soft, urgent, speaking in no tongue she understood but leaving her ears ringing and her heart racing. The sisters gathered in the main chapel that evening, attempting to drive away the growing unease with hymns and prayer. But the candles on the altar guttered and died one by one, though the air was still. Every face grew pale, every voice faltered. An oppressive weight settled over the gathering, and it became harder to speak, harder even to breathe. Several glanced toward the side doors leading to the old wing, their faces tightening with a fear they dared not voice. In the privacy of her office, the Mother Superior retrieved the dusty box of old keys and unlocked the cabinet containing the convent's few security devices. She had not checked the basement feed in years. Few remembered it existed. When the screen flickered to life, static clouded most of the footage, but for one agonizing moment she saw it. The old basement room bathed in a shifting, unnatural light. Shadows twisted along the walls, not cast by flame or form, but moving, independently, dancing in rhythms that no human mind could bear to follow. At the center of it all was Sister Eliana, unmoving, a small dark figure barely visible against the seething patterns etched into the stone. And then the screen went black. She turned away, fighting back the cold that spread up her arms. She ordered the basement wing sealed again, but in her heart she knew it was too late. The ritual had been set in motion. Whatever had been locked away was no longer contained. It pulsed now beneath their feet, feeding on fear, waiting for the next step in a design none of them could yet see. That night a storm swept over the convent, though the skies remained clear. Doors rattled on their hinges. Windows shuddered as if struck by unseen hands. In the sleeping quarters, several sisters awoke gasping, their dreams filled with images of vast, broken landscapes and towers that bled shadows into endless skies. No one spoke of it aloud, but by dawn the convent felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. They had not protected the ancient secret. They had only delayed its hunger, and now it had found a new voice, a new vessel, and it had only just begun. The convent tried to move on, but something had shifted irreversibly. In the mornings the halls felt longer, darker, as if the very architecture was subtly warping under the strain of what had been unleashed. The sisters went about their routines with bowed heads and quickened steps, avoiding the old wing altogether, pretending they did not hear the faint thudding that sometimes rose through the stone. No one spoke of the missing Sister Eliana. Her absence was a wound, festering silently beneath the surface of every prayer, every whispered hymn. The Mother Superior, carrying the guilt heavier than any habit on her shoulders, spent her nights scouring ancient texts, desperate for explanations buried deeper than the convent's own memory. She found only fragments, references to the sealed chamber, warnings written in faded ink centuries ago, cautions not to disturb the foundation laid over something that should never have been unearthed. There was mention of a rite, a barrier, maintained not through magic but through obedience, through forgetting. And Sister Eliana had broken that fragile pact by accident, by innocence, by need. It was during one of these sleepless nights that the final revelation came. In the early hours before dawn, the bell of the main chapel tolled once, long and hollow, though no hand had touched its rope. The sisters awoke at once, hearts hammering, gathering in the cold corridors with wide, frightened eyes. Drawn as if by invisible strings they made their way to the chapel, stepping cautiously over the cold stones, listening to the unnatural stillness that had fallen over the building. The heavy wooden doors of the chapel stood open, swinging slightly on their hinges. Inside, the air crackled with a dense electric pressure. The candles along the walls had burned down to stubs, and the air smelled thick of wax and smoke, though no new flames had been lit. The altar at the center of the room was not empty. Draped across it lay Sister Eliana's habit, neatly folded, pristine and untouched by dust or ash. But of Eliana herself there was no sign. Above the altar, carved deep into the ancient stone of the chapel's back wall, a new mark had appeared. Overnight. It was not written by human hand. The sisters recoiled instinctively from its jagged, spiraling shape, a symbol that seemed to throb with a malevolent rhythm. It was the same mark Sister Eliana had seen form within the cursed book, the same that had reshaped the carvings on the basement floor. The Mother Superior moved closer, heart pounding painfully, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the new carving. As she touched it, a vision flashed before her eyes. Not a dream, not a memory, but something deeper, something planted inside her mind. She saw the old convent being built stone by stone, not as a house of worship, but as a cage for something buried far beneath the earth, something that had slept through centuries of prayers and hymns. Until now. In her vision, she saw Sister Eliana standing at the center of a great circle, not consumed, not destroyed, but transformed. She was no longer merely a sister of the convent. She had become something else, something bound to the darkness she had awakened, her soul entwined with ancient forces that recognized no cross, no scripture, no salvation. The Mother Superior staggered back, gasping, her palms still burning where it had touched the mark. Around her, the other sisters murmured prayers, but their words felt weak, impotent against the weight of what had taken root within their walls. They realized with a terrible certainty that their convent was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a vessel, a doorway. In the days that followed, strange phenomena multiplied. Candles refused to light. The bells tolled at random hours, their tones warping and deepening into low, vibrating notes that rattled the windows. Shadows pooled where no light should have cast them, and whispering voices echoed down empty corridors, never ceasing, never letting them forget. The convent was no longer under their control. It belonged to the ancient will that had slumbered beneath it, and to the new servant it had claimed. Outside the convent walls, life continued, oblivious. Pilgrims still came, seeking prayer, seeking peace. They did not see the subtle wrongness in the air, the shifting glances of the sisters, the faint shimmer that sometimes danced at the edges of the chapel's stone floor. And somewhere deep beneath, the chapel, in the sealed room where no one dared to descend again, the ancient cymbals pulsed steadily in the darkness, beating in time with a heart that had never truly stopped. The awakening was complete, and it was only the beginning. The convent endured, outwardly unchanged, its ancient stones weathering the seasons as they always had. Pilgrims still arrived, breathing whispered prayers into the cold air, lighting candles beneath worn statues of saints who could no longer hear them. The world outside spun forward, unaware that something within those walls had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. The sisters moved like shadows through the corridors, their faces pale, their smiles too tight, their words thin and brittle. They continued their rituals, singing the old hymns, reciting the prayers, but it was all hollow now, a careful performance played for the sake of those who still believed that the convent was a place of light. At night, the air grew heavier. The bells sometimes rang with no hand to pull the rope. The stone floors grew cold even in summer, and strange patterns appeared in the frost that crept across the chapel's windows before dawn. The sisters learned not to question it. They whispered rosaries with trembling fingers, avoiding the old corridors where the walls seemed to listen, where the stones seemed to breathe, and deep below, beneath layers of ancient rock and prayer-soaked floors, the heartbeat continued. Steady, patient, growing stronger with each passing season. Those who stayed too long in certain parts of the convent spoke of dreams, visions of towering black spires, of endless fields of ash, of a sky torn, open by something vast and unseen. Some dreams ended with a voice whispering from the dark, calling their names in tongues they could not understand but instinctively feared. The Mother Superior kept these confessions hidden, locking them away in the same silent fear that gripped her heart each time she passed the old sealed stairway. New sisters arrived over the years, drawn by the convent's reputation for solemnity and devotion. They did not know what lay beneath the stones they walked upon. They were taught the prayers, the songs, the routines. But a few, restless and searching, like Ileana once was, would sometimes find themselves standing before the old locked doors, feeling the faint, unspoken pull. Some would shudder and walk away. Some would linger a moment too long, and the convent waited. The ancient will that had been stirred awake was in no hurry. It had already breached its prison. It had found new vessels, new channels. The rituals had changed forms, slipping into the fabric of daily life like rot into wood. Silent gestures at the wrong moments. Prayers said with the wrong intent. Candles, lit for things no holy light should nourish. Some warnings are left not to be spoken aloud, but to be felt, heavy in the bones and the breath of those who come too close. In the far corners of the chapel, where the shadows pool deepest, a faint mark remains. A spiral carved so subtly into the stone that only those who already carry the seed of understanding can see it. They had sealed the door. They had locked away the relics. They had buried the memories beneath layers of tradition and time. But it had never been enough. Some things once awakened do not sleep again.